I want to talk to you about prayer tonight, not because I think you need to learn anything else about prayer. This is our prayer meeting crowd, so you already know about prayer, but just as an encouragement to us, I remember back when I was just a very young Christian, anytime the pastor said he's going to be preaching on prayer, I'd think, wow, couldn't you find something more exciting? But as I've grown in the Lord and learned more about spiritual things, and I've learned the importance of prayer. And the truth is, we probably don't know enough about prayer. Instead of knowing too much or not wanting to hear anything about it, I want to talk to you tonight about something maybe a little bit different about prayer. Here in Mark 11, now he's been talking about this. This is where in the context he talks about if you got faith, that you can move mountains and that kind of thing. And then he says there in verse 24, therefore I said to you, and again, you know what the therefore is there for, don't you? Because of what has just been said. Therefore I said to you, what things soever ye desire. And just kind of draw a little circle around or draw a line under that word desire, because that's the key of this verse here. Whatsoever things you desire, when ye pray, believe that you receive them, and ye shall have them. And the key word in that again is the word desire. And then in Psalm chapter 37, verse 4, and I'll just read it for you. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Some folks just do not pray. And I'm talking about Christian people. Some, they just don't pray. They don't make their request to God. And many folks who do pray do so to no avail. And if there's a key to this that we're discussing here tonight, it's that the missing ingredient in our prayers is desire. Desire. In fact, desire is the very basis of prayer. Jesus didn't say whatsoever you ask when you pray. He didn't say whatsoever you want when you pray. He said whatsoever things you desire when you pray. Whatsoever things you desire when you pray. Desire is as much an element in prayer as faith is. I'm afraid that a lot of times we ask for things that we don't really desire in our soul. There's no real yearning in our souls, no groaning in our spirit. The order of prayer is this. This is speaking now. We, as humans, as people, there's not a desire to pray for things, ask God for things, unless we have a need. We're just kind of made that way, aren't we? We got to have a need. You always pray more when you're going through a trial or when there's a need. You have a need to pray. We don't like needs, do we? God knows if he didn't create needs in our life that we would never pray. I've told you about one time when I was pastor in Tennessee, I hadn't been there long, and so our church was not, that big at the time. But I thought, I want to every morning when I pray, I'd pray about if I knew somebody was sick, I'd pray about but I got the idea. I'm going to make a list. And each day, there's 10 people, and I'm going to call them and ask them, so I want to pray for you. I'm going to go to the Lord in prayer. Can you tell me what your needs are? And you would be surprised at the number of people that I would call that would tell me, well, I don't have any needs right now. And so I got to thinking maybe I ought to pray that God will give them some needs. because the only way that you're going to pray like you ought to is when you have a need. Amen. So the first thing God does, he allows us to have a need. The second thing that happens is because I have a need, I have a desire. And because I have a desire, I believe that I can't take care of it, but God can. And I have faith that God can take care of this need that I have. And because I think God can take care of it, that's faith, then I make requests. I come to God and I ask, and then God sends the answer. One of the classic books on prayers, the one by John R. Rice, where he defines prayer as just asking and receiving. And that's the title of the book, Asking and Receiving. But there has to be in that asking, there has to be that desire, that yearning for the answer for it. The very premise of prayer, the very basis of prayer is desire, and it's missing from most prayers that are prayed. Many of us go through the motions. We go through the formality. We mouth words to God with no desire in our souls, no real hungering in our hearts, no yearning in our souls. We're not really praying. We're going through the motions. It's only the shell. It's only the outward show of prayer. You know, I've had over the years, and I respect people when people say, "Preacher, I can't pray in public, so I'd like, appreciate if you don't call on me to pray in public." And when people tell me that, I respect that. I don't unless I forget. Sometimes I forget and call on them. But if we have the right attitude about it, we realize we're not praying to be heard by men. We're praying to God, be heard by God. And so, when it's a heartfelt thing, then we are not even conscious that other people are listening, because in prayer we're talking to God. We're not really. Now, I think in public praying, I pray that you ought to pray. I believe you ought to pray loud enough that you can be heard. But in reality, your prayer is to God. It's not to man. And so it's all, we ought to pray with that attitude. This is something that's from our heart. Prayer ought to be part of our spiritual habit, and I'm cautious using that word habit. But when prayer becomes habit only, then and when it becomes duty, then it ceases to be prayer. I encourage people to have set times of prayer, but don't let that become the only time that you pray, because then it becomes rote, and you have to be careful about that. When I was in school, high school especially, we'd begin the morning, and the teacher would read a verse, or have one of the students read a verse in the Bible, or maybe a passage, and then we'd have prayer. Well, you know what the prayer was, don't you? It's called the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Now, that becomes a rote prayer. That's, you're just mouthing words. The Lord, that actually should not be called the Lord's Prayer. It should be called the disciples' prayer, because the Lord gave that in answer to their desire for the Lord to teach them to pray. And what the Lord's Prayer, what we call the Lord's Prayer, what it is, the Lord has given the principles there, the principles of what the prayer your praying ought to be made up of. And so it doesn't. Now, now personally, I believe that that's better than nothing. And I think, that with the students in school that having to recite that, I think that just, kind of draws their attention to the importance of prayer and all that. So I'm not saying don't do that at all. That would be better than nothing at all. But you have to be careful that it doesn't become just a formality, just mouthing some words. Prayer is not a petition, it is a passion. It is not just a habit, it's something that's driven from the soul of a person because of a hunger for something that God can give. One of the great elements of prayer missing, that is missing, is the element of desire, the very basis of prayer. In James chapter 5, verse 16, it says, the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That word fervent means to be stretched out. It speaks of a runner in the finishing kick of a race on the last lap, the last yardage when he's headed into the finish line. He's straining every muscle. That's what fervency speaks of. It also speaks of something being boiling hot, something boiling in the soul of a person. One of the great secrets of our lack of answered prayer can be found in the weakness of our desires. We have become so content in this society. What is destroying us is not necessarily the presence of evil desire, but the absence of godly desire. There's something lacking, something missing that desperately needs to be found again. Desire has concentration and fire. It wants a few things and wants them badly. It's not scrambled with 10,000 thoughts. Desire is narrow and single-minded. There's something that it must have. Most people's prayers have no intensity or fervency. They're not stretched out, laboring in prayer. Strong desire makes for strong prayers. Desire goes after those things it wants with everything that it has. It is desire that arms prayer with 1,000 pleas and robes it with invisible courage so that it will not be denied. It provides determination. Desire is the basis of determination as well. For many of us, there's no passion in our prayer. We keep the form while the inner life fades and dies and the heart grows cold and indifferent and literally unconcerned. We think that we're good Christians because we set a time aside and say a few words of prayer, but we have no passion. You sometimes pray for things you don't even want. You ask for things that would be an imposition on your lifestyle if you got them. Lester Roloff, one time he said many Christians pray for revival, but he said they wouldn't like it if they got what revival brings. I was telling Brother Tony earlier today about in studying, I was thinking about, we had an elderly woman in our church there in Tennessee that when she was a little girl, 6 years old, Billy Sunday came to Morristown, Tennessee, which is a city kind of north and east of Knoxville. And it's a pretty good drive, even in a car from Maryville over to Morristown. But she said Billy Sunday came there to hold one of his campaigns. And what he'd do when he'd go into a town like that, they'd construct a tabernacle. All it would be just a shell, lumber, just a shell, sides open because no air conditioning. It'd be a 1,000-seat tabernacle. There'd be that many people gathered inside, plus people standing outside. But he always wanted sawdust on the ground, and he became famous for asking people to hit the Sawdust Trail, so he was holding this campaign, and so her family, the mom and dad, they got all the kids together, and that was back when they drove horse and wagons or buggies, and in this case, they drove a wagon, horse and wagon, all the way from Maryville over to Morristown. And they took quilts and stuff, because they were going to stay there the whole week. And they took, had provision there that they could cook. The mom could cook, build a fire and cook, or whatever other method they might use for providing food for them. The meetings would only be at night, and so during the daytime, they had enough time, to prepare food, stuff like that. But they would sleep underneath the wagon. And they would take those quilts and they'd pile them down underneath the wagon. They'd sleep on top and with the quilts on them. And for a whole week they stayed there. And for that meeting with Billy Sunday and the the inconvenience, I was telling him, I said, you couldn't get people to do that today. We're spoiled. But they'd stay there the whole week, sleep at night there because it was too far to go back and forth with the horse and wagon. And they would, just unhook the wagon, tie the horse up over there somewhere in a place, where the horse could get food to eat and all, grass, I guess. And if they took hay along, for them. And but they'd sleep underneath that wagon. In fact, that became their house while they were there for the week. And she was telling me, she said, a lot of the businessmen in the city, they didn't like it. Not only there in Morristown, but in other cities, some of the business people wouldn't like it, especially people that had bars, pool halls, and stuff like that, because while he was there, he'd get the people saved that ran those places, so they'd close up. Said many bars shut down during a meeting when Billy Sunday was in town and stayed closed after he left. See, that's what revival would bring. And that's why Lester Roloff said that most people who pray for revival would not like it if revival came. They wouldn't like what it brought. And I think the same thing. A lot of our praying, it's not really with intensity. It's not really fervent. It's not a boiling heat prayer. It's not with strong desire. Our prayer has been tempered to a respectable lukewarmness. Lukewarmness makes God sick, doesn't it? God never intended for us to be lukewarm. He said, if you're not going to be red hot, I'd rather you be ice cold than lukewarm. I heard a preacher one time explaining that. He said, now, lukewarm is closer to hot than cold. If God really wants me red hot, then the question would come, why would he not rather have me lukewarm than cold? But he said the thing is, hot is uncomfortable. Cold is uncomfortable. He doesn't want you to be comfortable. Lukewarm is comfortable. The Lord I was preaching about the eagle stirring up the nest so the eaglets would get out and do what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to fly. And so she would tear that nest up, make it uncomfortable. And see, that's what God wants to do. He doesn't want us to get satisfied and get comfortable, and we ought to always be striving for better, to be better, to do better, and to do more. not to just get comfortable and satisfied. God said, I want you red hot, but if you're not going to be red hot, I'd rather you be as cold as an ice cube so you can get convicted so badly that you're uncomfortable. So that being cold or hot is not you're going to do more in either case than whenever you're lukewarm. Prayerlessness lacks the essential elements of true prayer. True prayer is based on desire. It has earnestness involved in it. Most people's prayers have no reckless abandon, like the prayers of those in the Bible, or like great revivalists of days gone by. You read in the Bible, people would pray things and you think, well, goodness, how's that going to ever happen? How's that prayer going to be ever answered? God likes impossible things, impossible for us, because that he can get the glory out of that. If it's something you can do yourself, then God doesn't get the glory out of it, does he? It's those things that we have to depend on God to do for us. In Exodus chapter 32, Moses came down from the mountain from God. God said the people have given themselves to idolatry. And he said, he said to Moses, step back, Moses, I'm going to kill them all and start over with you. We're just going to make a new race. I'll start over with you. And Moses fell on his face before God. He said, oh God, basically, and I'm not quoting this word for word, but he said, please deliver them, if not, blot me out of thy book also. Kill me too. He said, if you're going to kill them, go ahead and kill me. Now, it sounds to me like there may have been some desire in that prayer, don't you? Don't you think that would be true? It sounds to me like there was a little bit of reckless abandon involved in that prayer. Sounds like there was some passion in that prayer. It sounds to me like there was something that Moses wanted, and he wanted it bad. He wanted God to deliver those people. He wanted God to withhold his hand of judgment. He prayed and put himself on the line. We don't have much of that reckless abandon like Moses had, do we? What about with Jacob? When he said, I will not let thee go except thou bless me, he was not talking to some man. He was talking to God. I'm holding on to you. I'm not letting you go until I get the blessing. And by the way, it cost him. It cost him too. The Bible says that the sinew in the hollow of his thigh was shrunk. He limped for the rest of his life. But he didn't mind the price he had to pay, because he said there's something I have to have, no matter what the cost, something I have to have. And he came out of that a prince with God and with men. He had prevailed. There is such a thing as prevailing prayer. It's prayer with great desires, prayer with great heat, great fervency, prayer with the determination to importune until the answer comes. The reason you pray once and quit is because you have no desire. The reason you mouth prayers and don't know what you said 15 minutes later is because you don't pray with fervent desire. It's not something that burns in your soul, not something you want. You ever pray, you pray for somebody, maybe somebody in your family, or maybe somebody you work with, a friend or whatever, and you pray for their salvation. But do you pray with the fervency that Paul did when he said, I could wish myself accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh? Talking about Jews. He was a Jew. he said, if it were possible, I'd be willing to go to hell to see these Jews saved. Now, Paul also knew that was not going to happen. But he prayed with such intensity, fervency, such desire. He said, I'd be willing. Jacob said, I need the blessing of God. It burns in my soul. Whatever it costs, I have to have it. I'm not just delighting in approaching to you. I'm not just delighting in the formality, the outward show. There's something that burns in my soul, and I have to have it. David said, as the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. In Psalm 27:4, one thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. He said, there's a driving force in my life. It's the force of my prayer, but it's the force in my daily living also. John Knox prayed, oh God, give me Scotland or I die. That's desire. Give me Scotland or I die. David Brainerd, who was a missionary to the American Indians, he said, give me souls or take my soul. Yeah, I've studied the the subject of prayer a lot since I've been a Christian, and I've studied the great revivals of history, and one thing that's present in every great revival that's ever taken place, there's always been prayer. There's always been prayer that was behind that revival. I preached a lot of revivals, especially when I was in Tennessee. It seemed like every time I turned around, somebody was asking me to come preach a meeting. And just in a short period of time, I'd preached in 20 different churches, preaching revivals, 20 different churches. And I came to the place, I said, God didn't call me to be an evangelist. I'm a pastor. And I can't pastor my church by being away that often. And so I got where I would turn down. I still occasionally would, I felt like the Lord really wanted me to, I would preach revival. But the greatest revival that I was ever in, it was preceded by a 3-month prayer meeting. That church, for 3 months, every night they'd had cottage prayer meetings, or sometimes like meeting at the church, the whole church, meeting at the church, and they prayed for that meeting for 3 months. They prayed for that meeting, and I was the preacher, but anybody could have got up there and they could have seen miracles take place because of the prayers of God's people. That means that there was a desire there for revival and to see souls saved. And I know that revival is not getting souls saved. Revival is God's people getting revived. But most of the time in a revival meeting, there will be souls saved. If God's people get revived, then they'll bring people to church, or else they'll lead them to Christ himself and bring them. So, but there were things that happened in that meeting that just, I'd never experienced anything like it before, and haven't since. But in answers to prayer, people that were hard cases that during that meeting that got saved. I remember, I may have told you about this before, but there was a lady that was coming. She'd come on Monday night, Tuesday night boat, and when the invitation came, she came forward, and she was already saved. In fact, she was a member of that church, but she said, she came forward, she said, I want to pray for my husband. My husband is Church of Christ, and I cannot get him to come to a Baptist church. I can't get him to come with me. And she said, while he claims to be Church of Christ, he's not saved. He does not know Christ as his personal Savior. But you can't get him to come in a Baptist church. And she said, I'm coming to pray, and I'd like for you to pray for my husband. So we did, the pastor and I both. Each night we would, kneel beside her there and pray for her husband, and pray, he'd come and that he'd be saved. So on Wednesday night, he came. He came with her. And now, this was not just a cold turkey thing. I mean, she had been witnessing to him, and this had been going on for a long, long time. She was witnessing to him. So it wasn't just the message that night. But that night, I preached the message that I was calling 5 minutes. What will you do 5 minutes after you die? Or where will you be 5 minutes after you die? And so, it was mostly on about hell. And before I even got to the invitation, I mean, I was probably on about halfway through the message, and that guy stood up and he said, "Preacher, can I go ahead and get saved right now?" And yeah, you come on. And so he was over here getting saved while I'm finishing up the message. The preacher was over there leading him to the Lord. A lot of things like that happened in that meeting. Our pastor, Brother Smith, told a story one time. I don't remember if this was his family or if this was somebody else, but a little boy in the family got sick, and he was running real high temperature. And that was back in the days before electricity. They didn't have, out in the country, didn't have electricity. So there was no refrigeration, no ice or anything. And long way from town. And it took them a day or two before he could even get a doctor to come out. That was back in the days when doctors would come to the homes. The doctor came out and examined the little boy, and he was running extremely high temperature. And the doctor said, if we don't get this child's temperature down right away, he's not going to make it. He's going to die. He's not going to make it. And if we don't get it down soon, not only that, even if he did live, this is destroying his brain. And so he said, we got to have ice. We got to get some ice. And everybody said, well, how? There's no ice around. It's miles into where a store would be, and we don't even know if you even have any ice there when we get there. And we don't even know where to go, and didn't have automobiles. It was just, horse and wagon. And so they said, what are we going to do? And the doctor said, well, we're going to have to pray for a miracle. I said, I don't know what to pray for. I don't even know what to pray for. But we got to pray that somehow something can be done to get this boy's temperature down, or he's going to die. And so they got down and, praying, and, the family, of course, the mom and dad, you're talking about with desire. Now, that would make you pray with desire. And so they were praying, and going on, and especially the family members, really praying with fervency. And then somebody that had been outside came running in and said, started calling out, Mom and Dad, one of the children, older children, Mom and Dad, it's raining, and it's hailing. It's hailing. And they ran outside, and there were big chunks of hail, ice that was falling, covering the ground. They ran out, got buckets and pans and stuff, and started scooping the ice off of the ground and holding containers, to catch the ice that was falling from the sky. And so the doctor said, get that ice in here, and they already had a tub with water in it, and they put that ice in there and put that boy in there, and in just a little while they had his temperature down. Now, that's a miracle. That's something that can only happen in answer to fervent praying. Who would have ever thought of something like that happening? That had to be God that sent that ice in answer to their prayer. Janice and I, years ago, we were at the hospital in Knoxville. A man in our church, he was having heart surgery. In fact, what they were going to have to do, because the bottom part of his heart, and this has been years ago, so they didn't know as much, as they do now. But the bottom part of his heart, they were going to cut it away, because it was dead, and it was interfering with the rest of the heart, working right. And so we were there, and midnight comes around. The family was there. Janice and I were waiting until after the surgery, and all. And there was a good chance that he would not even make it through the surgery. So we were there, and at midnight, I just felt there had been an attendant there, a nurse, would come out periodically and say, well, everything's good. He's still, and they're still working, but everything's going okay. Well, then there was a period of time nobody came out, and so I got concerned. I said, and at midnight, I said, listen, we need to get down on our knees here and pray. I feel like something's wrong, something's not right, because nobody's come out to tell us what's going on for a good while. And so at midnight, we got down, all that family, and Janice and I, we got down beside the chairs or on our knees and began to pray that, that God would spare the guy and help the doctors and all that. And so we were still in prayer, and after about 15 minutes, around 12:15, the doctor then came out. The doctor that was one of the ones that was doing the surgery, and he called out, the name of the family, and because all of us then stood up, and he said, we've just had a miracle. We've just had a miracle. He said, just before midnight, just before 12 o'clock, we lost him, and we couldn't get his heart working again. We lost him. And he said at midnight, he said, all of a sudden his heart begins to work again, begin to pump again. And or I don't know if it was pumping, but it began to work. And he said it was at midnight. And I told him, I said, well, when you came out here just now, we were still praying. At midnight is when we dropped to our knees in here and began to pray. And he knew I was a preacher. He said, but preacher, he said, God answered your prayers because we lost him. He was gone. And the only way that he would be saved was, through God bringing him back. And he said that was an answer to prayer. We were doing some real, there was some real desire in our prayers when we were praying for that man. The desire of the righteous. In Proverbs 10:24, the Bible says, the desire of the righteous shall be granted. The desire, not the request, the desire. In Psalm 10, verse 17, the Bible says, Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. That means God hears everything I desire. Not everything I ask for, not everything I request, not everything that I mechanically read off to God. He hears what I desire. I mentioned David Brainerd where I go. On one occasion, he prayed out in the open air in about 2 feet of snow. He got on his knees praying for the American Indians. He lost track of time. He prayed with such intensity that he melted snow down to the ground in a 6-foot circle around his body in the open air. That's intense praying, and that's what desire. I just thought I've been thinking a lot about prayer, and I've really been praying a lot. Some things have happened in our church that I think requires intense praying, fervent praying, and this has been on my heart. So I just wanted to share this with you tonight. Would you stand, please?